Hello, and thank you for joining today's acquisition seminar hosted by the Federal Acquisition Institute. Today's seminar, entitled Can We Talk? Information Disclosure During the Acquisition Process, will offer valuable insight and useful information on disclosing information during the planning, pre-award, and award stages of the acquisition process. Many government contracting officers and industry representatives are uncertain about the kind of information that can and should be shared during the acquisition process and the time frame for sharing that information. Releasing certain information too soon can compromise the integrity of the process by creating an unfair competitive advantage to some vendors. However, releasing critical information too late in the process can render it useless, negatively impacting the volume and quality of the offers and subsequent acquisition outcome. The goal of this seminar is to help strike the right balance with the kind of information that can be released to industry, when that information can be released, and to whom that information can be released by the key players involved on the government side of the process. We're going to look at 3 specific stages of the acquisition process: planning, pre-award, and award. Collectively, we'll examine a number of myths and questions around information disclosure during these stages, while offering a few solid practices and key takeaways for preserving the integrity of the acquisition process and ensuring that members of industry have a clear understanding of the government's requirement so they are better positioned to submit quality proposals. Melissa Gary, Ombudsman for the General Services Administration, will be our guide leading us through the 3 stages.
As we all know, there are many steps in the acquisition process, but when does the process actually begin? What are the steps involved in developing the requirement? Who's responsible for it? And how can government and industry collaborate in this effort? This can be confusing to industry and sometimes government as well. John Andre is on the scene with 2 acquisition professionals to delve deeper into the requirements development stage of the acquisition and the collaboration between government and industry. John?
Hello again. Here with me now is Kitty Klaus, Acquisition Strategy Consultant, Enterprise Services, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and Tommy Benton, Senior Procurement Analyst, Federal Acquisition Service, General Services Administration. Kitty, Tommy, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Good. Tommy, let me begin with you by asking a very basic question. What is acquisition planning?
John, acquisition planning is defined within the FAR, FAR Part 2, and specifically at Subpart 2.101. And it is the process of identifying and describing requirements and determining the best method of meeting those requirements. And it should begin as soon as the need is identified by government.
Is there a certain format, process, or set of guidelines to follow in acquisition planning?
Yes, there is. In fact, for government, the acquisition plan is a formal written document that reflects the specific actions necessary to execute the approach established in the approved acquisition strategy. And these are, there's guiding contractual implementation. And in this plan, the planner forms a team, and that team is often referred to as the Integrated Projects Team, or IPT, and it consists of those who will be responsible for the significant aspects of the acquisition, such as contracting, financial, legal, and the technical aspects. Now, that format for that plan is found in FAR Part 7.
Huh, okay. Well, how do these items apply to industry?
Well, John, for industry, there is an aspect that they also always need to remember, and that is that the Procurement Integrity Act, found in FAR Part 3, it pertains to them as well as it does to government personnel. And there are certain procurement sensitive information pieces, such as contractor bid or proposal information and source selection information, that has restrictions on being released.
So we've talked a little bit about acquisition planning, what it is and the steps to follow. What happens during the planning stage on the government side?
Well, John, planning the acquisition includes preparation of documents to support the determined need of the government and all required approvals. Market research is conducted, and the requirements are clearly defined at this point. Funding is identified, reserved, and approved by a certifying official in a written document along with the development of the independent government estimate. Also, evaluation factors such as price and non-price factors are being considered.
All right. How would you recommend industry prepare for the acquisition planning stage?
Industry can be prepared by clearly defining what they do and making that information available through a capability statement. They can also monitor trends in government purchasing, that being products or services that maybe specific agencies are going to utilize, and also for the future procurements and if appropriate for their business, they could explore becoming a vendor on standing government contract vehicles such as the GSA Multiple Award Schedules Program or GSA GWACs.
Oh, very good. Now, Kitty, from an industry perspective, what are you doing or seeking from government during the acquisition planning stage?
Well, during this phase, our business development teams are often meeting with the program offices and the technical directors. We want to understand our clients' needs and their requirements and to see if there's a fit with our capabilities. And in response to those needs, we may be arranging for technical demonstrations, bringing in subject matter experts to further kind of refine those requirements, kind of get into what the customer truly wants and needs, and then to demonstrate those new capabilities. We're also, at the same time, kind of gauging whether this is going to turn into a real procurement. Does it have executive sponsorship? Does it have funding? Along with FITARA, we're also looking at the CIO approvals. We're very keenly aware in the IT sector that investments need to meet the mission needs, and they have to demonstrate an added value and a match up to the business requirements. Okay. So we're looking for that because we want to make sure it's a priority and a real procurement.
Exactly. So like we were kind of discussing, as government is doing its market research to find out who might fulfill a need, you're trying to see who might have a need that needs fulfillment.
Right. We're trying to look for that match.
Very good.
In addition, we're looking at the relationships with the agency, who are the stakeholders, who owns the program, who's the actual user or recipient of that solution or service. So they're all very important things because we need to take that information back and then look at our capabilities. Do we have the capability they're looking for? Can we meet their requirements? Do we have the clearances and the resources? They're all very important things to consider as we refine our technical solution. Also, things you may not have thought of. If it's existing work, we're going to ask who's the incumbent. That's very important to us. In a way, it's a make or buy decision. We may decide to actually work with the incumbent. It's not always that we have to compete against them. Perhaps we have a capability that could complement their solution. If that's not going to work, then yes, we may decide, well, maybe this is a real procurement, and let's go ahead and prime. But then we have to look at our solution, look for any gaps, and we begin to look for partners to complement that. We look at small business, especially those that might have knowledge of the customer, and we want to bring them onto our team, as well as complementary technologies. Again, both industry and government are making an investment in this opportunity, but we need to justify the expense. It costs money to bid. In industry, we have limited bid and proposal funds, so we have to make sure it's a real procurement, we can do it, and it's good business. They're all very critical decision factors for us at this time. Overall, during this phase, it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate our capabilities and to see if there's a match with the customer's needs.
It makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm kind of curious, how would industry even know that the government is in the acquisition planning stage? How is information exchanged or shared between government and industry at this stage?
Well, John, meetings with agency procurement and technical managers is a good way. One-on-one discussions with program office to understand client needs with precautions to the Procurement Integrity Act. There's also the leveraging of industry and government organizations. Some examples of that would be ACT-IACT or the NCMA organization. Government can develop requests for information, RFIs, either prior to a FAR 8.4 GSA MAS RFQ or a FAR 15 RFP, and in an attempt really to locate interested parties in the contracting community and perhaps learn some technical elements that the government may not be aware of. There is the sharing of draft statements of work for industry comment. There is the hosting that government can do of government industry days for the vendor community. We can develop different methods of communications to share industry, perhaps maybe industry websites or portals that are available, or federal agency websites or portals that are available, if you will. Meetings with program managers, one-on-one discussions with them is always a good way.
That's great. So we've gone through some activities benefiting government. So Kitty, what activities would benefit industry in the acquisition planning stage?
It's kind of a mirror of what Tommy just said. Certainly the one-on-one discussions are wonderful. We've been through a number where in one case the agency had us write a white paper. And in response for a contribution with a white paper on suggestions for how this contract could run, they allowed us to come in for a one-on-one discussion. That was very helpful. It's helpful to have the one-on-ones with the program offices. Sometimes it's more than a one-on-one. It might be a group demonstration. Many of the companies have technical demonstration centers, and we often invite government customers to come, especially if it's a complex technology, to come see how that particular technology works. We like industry days, but they need to be meaningful. Not just reading off an RFP, but a discussion of what's going on, what the customer is really looking for. I think it's ideal to have users talk about what they're looking for. That really ensures a good outcome. When we have industry days, we like to see the attendee lists, because if you think about it, in a way it's a matchmaking. You want to find other companies to complement your solution, so you are looking to see who else is interested. Industry associations, as Tommy mentioned, are also good. Often we not even associate it with a specific procurement, but we're continually having speakers come in from agencies, discuss their mission, their requirements, and it's a way for us to begin to understand what's important to various agencies or their components. So these are all very positive ways we can communicate in this space.
Oh, that's great. So what would the two of you say are the key points of information disclosure in the acquisition planning stage? Kitty, let's start with you this time.
Well, just to reiterate, John, open communication is the key. Technology is moving so quickly, and agencies want to deliver citizen services that are secure, timely, and efficient. So you need to be able to have that conversation. What's out there? Help me find it. This is what I want to do, but how are ways that I could achieve it? So these are the things that need to be covered. And being able to discuss new technologies and these capabilities with industry brings value to the agencies, but it also allows industry to help demonstrate our capabilities and the way we can help agencies meet their goals and be successful.
Great. Tommy, how about from the government side?
Well, John, I'll tell you, I could not agree with Kitty more that the element of open communication is critical. But I do need to caution industry and make sure they understand that within government, the function of technical, or our technical side of government, who is the end user and has the requirement that needs to be procured, is separated from contracting. Our contracting personnel are not necessarily technically savvy versus our technical people are not necessarily contractual savvy. So that element of understanding that we work together within government, but we have different function, is one of those critical things. All the government wants to do is to receive a quality product or service on time at reasonable price. And that reasonable price includes a profit or fee to be paid to the vendor that is going to supply that. And so I believe that working together, industry and government, open communication through the various methods that we have is going to make that a reality and a win-win.
Fantastic. Excellent. Kitty, Tommy, thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thanks, John, and thanks to Kitty Klaus and Tommy Benton for a very insightful discussion. Acquisition planning is an essential first step in achieving optimal outcomes for the government. The purpose of planning is to ensure that the government meets its needs in the most effective, economical, and timely manner. This involves specific key members of the government's team and includes several vital steps. Acquisition planning begins at the point at which the government's need is identified. Information is shared with industry through various forms during this stage. Also, it's worth noting that in instances of very large requirements, agencies will establish an IPT and pull together representatives from several offices to manage the acquisition process from start to end. So the team acts as one entity throughout the process. So we now know that information sharing starts with the program office, oftentimes through issuance of an RFI. This is part of their market research efforts to identify potential industry sources, make buy or make decisions, and develop the independent government cost estimates. This also helps them secure funding and coordinate with other internal offices, such as the CIO, for major IT projects. In most instances, it is the program office that is responsible for translating the government's need into a requirement for acquisition. This involves working with the customer or end user to clarify the operational vision, the business need, the technical and design specifications, and securing funding. Once this is completed, the requirement is passed to the contracting office for acquisition of the good or service. What happens during this step of the process? How does the contracting office mold the requirement into a viable instrument that will lead to an optimal outcome for the end user? John Andre is on the scene with Jamil Charlton, procurement analyst with NASA, and Lawana Russell, president, Business Management Associates, Inc., to help us gain better insight into this area of the acquisition process.
Lawana, Jamil, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
So we've completed the acquisition planning step. It was performed by the program office, and now the requirement is in the hands of the contracting office for the pre-award stage. Let's start by asking, what is the pre-award stage?
The pre-award stage of the acquisition process is the period between requirements definition and contract award. This includes the sources sought and the creation of the solicitation itself, as well as in-house cost estimate, technical requirements, and evaluation criteria.
That's great. So Lawana, from the industry perspective or from the industry side, what's taking place in the pre-award stage?
From the industry perspective, it is so important for companies to remain strategic. You know, a lot of small businesses will decide, I want to go after all of it, but is this a customer that you're really targeting? Are these within your core capabilities and your core competencies? Make sure you're making a strategic decision. And I definitely recommend that small businesses especially look at the sources sought and the RFIs that Jamila was talking about, because you never know what is going to happen with those. We responded to an RFI, and it actually turned into a woman-owned small business set aside for us.
Oh, outstanding.
Yeah.
What about the government perspective on that?
During the pre-award stage, the government contracting office issues, like I said earlier, the sources sought, the synopsis, the draft RFP. We have pre-proposal and pre-solicitation conferences. We also receive the proposals once the solicitation is out on the street, and then we receive the proposals and start getting prepared for the evaluation of those proposals.
Okay. Since we're talking information disclosure, what information is being shared? How is the information being shared?
Information is shared with industry during this stage of the acquisition via the FBO, the Federal Business Opportunities website. We also use various forms of social media, as well as agency acquisition websites, agency web pages, and then with the pre-proposal conferences and the different documents that come out during the acquisition phase.
And in the pre-award stage, what is industry looking for?
We're really looking for any opportunity that we can get to learn more about the opportunity. We want to know what the government is thinking. Is there a particular pain? Can we go to those industry days and listen and ask questions and really try to get inside their heads to see why they released this opportunity? Is it something new, or is it just a maintenance opportunity where it's ongoing and it's something they've been doing year after year, or is this something that's new and wonderful?
Interesting perspective. Getting inside government's head, that kind of leads to the next question.
Sure.
What could industry do to get inside the head of government, or that is, what could government do to make it easier for industry to compete under solicitations to secure contracts?
You know, from our perspective, it's almost two sides. It's getting to the government's heads as much as we can and asking questions and hoping that we can get detailed answers to our questions when we ask them. But then on our side, we also have to take that responsibility of understanding whether or not we can do the work. That's the easy part for some of us, right? Yes, we can do it, but can we win? What is it going to take to really win this opportunity, and what do we have to do on our side to do it? So many organizations, and I recommend doing what's called a capability matrix, where you take the statement of work, section C, and you run down and say, okay, can we do all of these? Do we have these holes filled? And if you don't, maybe you look for a business partner, a teaming partner that can help you fill the holes. And then you do what's called a compliance matrix, looking at sections L and M of the RFP to say, what is the government looking for me to submit to them? It's very important that you submit it to the government with all the information that they want, all the sections, dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure that all the information is there.
Mm-hmm. And Jamil, your thoughts on what government can do to make it easier for industry to compete?
Well, from the government's perspective, it's very important for the industry representatives to monitor communications that are coming from the government. So subscribe to the federal business opportunities notices, to watch for any changes to the solicitation or requirements, because quite often requirements change during this process, and so amendments come out. There may be a change in the technical requirements, or maybe a change in the due date. Also monitor the agency websites for changes. It's important that vendors interested in proposing on these opportunities monitor and keep constant eye out for any changes that may occur during this process.
Sounds good. Sometimes I know there are one-on-one discussions between a contractor, a vendor, and the contracting officer. Do you find in your experience that they're good, helpful, useful? They make much of a difference for you?
Amazing, yeah. We'll take all of the understanding and information that we can get. Our goal as a contractor is not always just to get the money, but it's really to serve the government well. It's really to serve the mission, and the more information that we have related to why this project is coming out, again, is it maintenance or is it something that you need a problem solved? The more we understand that, the better we are able to provide you a solution that really is going to hit to the core of your problem.
Sounds good. And Jamil, again, from the government side, what have you seen from your perspective on those one-on-one meetings?
I understand how valuable a one-on-one discussion would be between the industry representative and the contracting officer. However, that could possibly give an implied sense of favoritism to one vendor over another. And so when it is something specialized in the early stages of the pre-award process, then those would be helpful. But what's more important is that the same communications are shared amongst all vendors. All interested parties are receiving the same information. So when I was a CO, I had the industry questions come into me, and then I would report those out in a synopsis with a frequently asked question, so that everyone had the same vantage and no one was perceived to have an advantage over another offerer.
Very good. So bringing it all back together to recap information disclosure during the pre-award stage, what are your key takeaways? What would those be?
I think information disclosure is extremely important. Communications, open communications with the government and the industry representative is key in making sure that our needs are met, both on the government side as well as industry side. Mm-hmm. And so it's important for us to recognize the partnership, but also recognize the boundaries that may be perceived.
From the industry side, it's about understanding that mission and making sure that we're prepared. You know, small businesses, and I've almost been in that space where you're like, oh, I can do this. I know I can do it,
right.
But can I win it? Right? Do we really know enough about this organization or the opportunity? Are we missing a key component of what that agency is looking for? And those are some hard decisions. And it's hard to say no when you feel in your heart that you can really win it. But those bid and proposal dollars are slim. So make a good decision as to whether or not you can really win that work.
Well, outstanding. Luana, Jamil, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, John. So the pre-award stage is one of the most critical stages in the acquisition process. This is where the program office and the contracting office collaborate to refine the requirement, assess market capabilities, develop the acquisition strategy, and issue the solicitation, which formalizes everything in the acquisition plan. Significant information between government and industry is shared during this stage. So the program office defines the requirement and the contracting office refines it. It's at this stage that information sharing is at full throttle, giving way to development of the acquisition strategy. The contracting office uses platforms such as RFIs, draft solicitations, industry day conferences, and social media blogs to engage and share information about the requirement. The next stage of the process is where all the planning and refining of the requirement come to realization. This is where the quality of the proposals let us know how well we've done our jobs with regard to engagement and market research. The vision of the federal acquisition system is to deliver on a timely basis the best value product or service to the customer or federal agency. This is the stage where planning and pre-award activities converge and the vision of the system is manifested. This is one of the most critical stages in the process and the stage most vulnerable to protests and disputes. To explore this further, we have two longtime practitioners joining John Andre for one last discussion.
To address information disclosure activities during the award stage, I have with me Melody Giangreco, Executive Contracts Manager, Federal Schedules Incorporated, and Alan Monaco, Procurement Analyst, Department of the Treasury. Well, thank you both for joining me and jumping into the information disclosure activities that take place during the award stage of the acquisition process.
Well, thanks for having us.
So Alan, let me start with you. What are those information disclosure activities that take place during this stage of the process?
So yeah, that's a great question. The biggest point of confusion is probably between the evaluation and the award. People don't really know what the terms of art are, and we're going to explain that.
And I think looking at from the industry perspective, John, that there is a significant confusion with respect to even these phases or stages and even these sub-stages within. So it's important to understand where you're at.
Okay. What are then some of those terms of art that you were just mentioning? I've heard different things. I thought you kind of touched on it. Exchanges was one word.
Right.
What else is there? What else should we know?
So, well, you really need to start with exchanges because exchanges are actually the broadest term. That's really any written or oral communication that is exchanged between offerors and the government. Exchanges actually can be broken down further into clarifications, discussions, and negotiations. And that's really where the confusion exists. What you want to know at that point is what can and can't be said by each side.
And I think it's important for the industry to understand what the agency and the contracting officer is actually asking for at that point, and be clear and concise in the responses for what the agency needs. It's not the time to necessarily revise your entire proposal.
No, as a matter of fact, you can't do that. Before the establishment of a competitive range, no one can change their offers unless they're instructed to do so by the government. Unless there's something non-material after the receipt of, after the submission deadline, if you realize that you made some minor clerical mistake,
Attached a wrong document,
attached
maybe.
a wrong document,
Right.
then yes, you can contact, the best course of action is to contact the government and ask for instructions on how to submit a revision to that, which is essentially an administrative clarification.
But it doesn't materially change my proposal.
Correct. If you're making an attempt at that point to change the
Content?
the content of the proposal, the extent of what you're offering, or the dollars and cents, the terms and conditions, then no, that's
Okay.
not allowed at that point.
Yeah, and I think that's very important for us in industry to remember, again, what stage and what we're capable and authorized to do at that point.
Right.
Now, what about the different types of acquisitions? For instance, I understand there are discussions and there are negotiations. What are the differences between the two? Do you use them? Can you use them at the same time, or are they for different purposes?
Well, no, they're actually, there's a lot of confusion between the two, and they can be used somewhat synonymously. So discussions is a situation where the contracting officer feels that proposals could be revised for the government to get a better deal in the end. Negotiations are the specific exchanges between the government and the offerers that actually change the proposals.
Okay, and would you use one or the other during, say, an open competition, sole source,
Right.
or various other processes like I mentioned?
So this is probably best explained with an example. Discussions would occur in a competitive situation. And so what you would do for one offer, you would do for all. If you have the need to change, to make changes in a proposal, this is when that occurs. In a sole source environment, that's when negotiations are going to occur.
Okay. Can you bypass any of those activities? Would you want to bypass? I'm thinking again from the industry perspective. Is it advantageous to the government to bypass negotiations or discussions or any of the other information disclosure activities at the award stage, during the award stage?
So if you're going to bypass that stage, it's allowed, but only if you stated so in the solicitation.
Right.
Okay? So the government has the right, but not necessarily the obligation, to award without discussions. The clue for the contractors is to know that in advance. Look in the solicitation for either the contract clause, which should be contained in the instructions to offerers, or language in the body of the solicitation that says that they intend to award without discussions. But keep in mind that if they find later that they have a reason to do so, they can open up those discussions with all offerers.
And I think the industry has got to stay in tune to the parts of every part of the solicitation, because every part is important. We can't say that there's one element, but to Alan's point, the instructions and the evaluation criteria, which are part of following the instructions, are extraordinarily important, because if they are intention is to award it without discussion, then that might change, the offeror's position on their pricing and what they want to go in with their best and final at that point. But again, I think if the agency does open it up for discussion to one offeror, it's going to be opened up for everyone.
Okay.
Right.
But if it's a pricing negotiation with one entity, and all of those entities then at that point are deemed technically acceptable or have passed at least you're within the competitive range,
Right.
then it's going to be everybody in that bucket, correct?
It is everybody
Yeah,
in
that's
that
what I
bucket, yes.
Okay.
That's the place where that occurs.
Great. Now we've talked a little bit about the types of information disclosure. What about the information itself? What information can be disclosed during the award stage of the process?
Well, if we're talking about the exact award and perhaps the notices that go out afterwards, it's pretty basic information. We can reveal the name of the winning offerer, their address, the bottom line price paid for the contract, in other words, the whole contract amount. We're not giving out individual line item pricing at that point. The number of offerers, that's what can be revealed in the final stage.
Okay.
And I think, John, for the industry, it's really important during this stage to be patient, because they have to they meaning the agencies have to evaluate every offer that's received on its own merits, and they don't, depending upon the number of offers even received, it's going to take time. It's not the time to reach out to the contracting officers directly and try to get, direct information if that stage has not been opened up for communication. I think that it's be realistic for how long things may take within the federal market space, and devote the resources and energies elsewhere when your proposal's in until the proposal's ready to move forward with some sort of discussion, or maybe hopefully an award. Right.
Okay. And that's what I was curious about too. We talked about after the award. Is there anything that you can share before the award is made? Something that you can share after you receive all of the proposals? Like you've hit the cutoff date, you have all of the proposals you're going to get. is there anything that you can share? Is there any step in the process prior to award that you might be able to share? And with whom can you share that information?
Yeah, that's another great question. At this point, what's of utmost importance is procurement integrity. So any information that's exchanged really needs to be limited to the offeror pool. Okay, someone who submitted a valid offer, because otherwise you're not an interested party, not at this stage. And so the number one goal is procurement integrity and the proprietary interests of the offerers.
Makes a lot of sense.
And I want the industry offers that are not going to be accepted receive notices first. Your offer was simply not within the competitive range, so they'll receive the notifications first, and they can, I believe, ask for the debriefing, correct, Alan? At that point?
Yeah, you can ask for a debriefing. The government can't reveal the final numbers, because then that would allow offers that are in the competitive range to then have an unfair advantage.
But what I don't want industry to do is not ask.
Right.
Because I believe that that's the way that these companies will learn, especially smaller businesses that are trying to really permeate the federal space. In the beginning, very challenging efforts to do so. So it's important to learn from where you fell short, so that next time, and the offers will get bigger, and when you'll win at some point in the game, it's going to happen. But you need to just keep consistent advancement of your knowledge of where you're falling short, and correct the wrongs, and learn from it.
Okay. So it sounds like, again, you can have some kind of exchange of information prior to establishing the competitive range and then after.
Yeah, the notice that you're going to get before the competitive range is established is essentially the one that shuts off the spigot of the money flowing out from the businesses. Okay,
Yeah.
The government has an obligation to shut down the costs associated with the proposal process for businesses, and they want to do so at the very earliest point in the process. So you can ask for it at that point. You can ask for your debriefing, but it can't be had in full until after the award is made. And that's when the most information can be
And
received.
I think that cutoff is an interesting point, because I need to stress that these proposal preparations and RFP responses take time. Time is money in the industry and for the industry. And in some of these smaller businesses, you devote a significant number of resources to your RFP responses. So the sooner an agency can let a company know, great job, but not good enough, the better. And it does allow them to sort of, all right, we'll ask for our debrief, learn from our mistakes, but we're going to cut it off at this point and move on to the next RFP response.
Okay, that sounds good. Now, after the competitive range is established, is there then another set of activities that might take place where the government is discussing with industry to say, okay, you're in the competitive range, but here are some strengths, weaknesses? What other things could you share? Again, still prior to award, but now after the competitive range is established.
Yeah, that's the part where the government is obligated to allow the competitive range pool of offerers to revise their proposals. Okay, so they want to discuss the significant strengths and weaknesses and the deficiencies at that point, with the goal of having the proposals be improved. So that is exactly where it happens in the process.
And that criteria will be established in the solicitation, Alan, right? Where it'll be whether it's lowest price, technically acceptable, and you have to pass sort of that technical and administrative evaluation first, and then the remaining pool are the ones that will then be perhaps negotiations.
Right.
And that's, again, for the industry, be aware of exactly what stage it is so that you can respond properly.
Right, and that's even true in the case of a non-competitive situation where we've progressed to the point just before award and the government feels that the proposal could be improved in some material way, so they'll have a direct one-on-one negotiation at that point. And so, I mean, that could even make the difference between making an award and not making an award, if they can successfully, get past a hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, since you mentioned at this stage that offers can modify, I guess, their proposals, are there terms of art? Again, the definitions that you were talking about before, there's a lot of confusion about what these terms of art are between revisions, modifications, or could an offerer even say at this stage, we know that we're part of the competitive range, but we just want to withdraw entirely?
Yeah, so proposal revisions and modifications are different. A modification to a proposal occurs when you realize that you need to make a change to your proposal, and it can originate with the offerer. Okay, revisions are directed by the government. The government will say, listen, we need you to revise, maybe we're going out for best and final offers, or we had an amendment to our solicitation, and so we're asking everyone to go ahead and revise their proposals. The modification, again, the distinction may probably be best stated by saying that that can come from the offerer. The offerer can realize at some point, hey, I need to make a change, but the best way of achieving that is to contact the contracting officer and get instructions.
And I think when the agency too issues some sort of change themselves, which maybe those amendments, the pool of offerers have to acknowledge them and make sure that they do timely, because it is important to keep the process going.
Yeah, that's a requirement stated in the solicitation, in instructions to offerers. There will be instructions generally to state that if an amendment goes out, that the offerers need to acknowledge it in writing. And that keeps the integrity in process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Now, so we've gotten through that, and we've gotten to, I guess, the award stage, post-award stage, if you will, of the award stage of the process. Yeah. What other notices? What are the communications made between government and industry at that point?
So the most important piece of information at this point for an unsuccessful offer is that post-award notice, right? And that's when they can request their debrief, right at that point. Upon receiving it, they have 3 days to request a debriefing, and then the government will schedule that at the earliest available time. And that post-award notice is really the one that should kind of wake you up to say, okay, we didn't get the award. Now what course are we going to go in?
What can we learn?
What can we learn from right? Okay. What can we learn from a result of a result of this? Okay. Yeah.
And I think the industry too looks at not only those debriefs, and if it is I want to point out, if it's a 8.4 schedules procurement, debriefings are not required by a contracting officer. However, I can assure you that in my experience with industry, if you ask a contracting officer, even under a schedules purchase, a GSA schedules purchase, they're more than willing to share some tidbits of information. It won't be as formal perhaps as a non-scheduled debriefing, but they're certainly willing to give you some knowledge as to where you fell short. And I think that's, again, very important to learn where we can improve in the next RFP response. The other challenge we have after the award notices go out sometimes, and we can probably teach a whole nother class on this and discuss it, are the protests. And that is also a challenge on both sides, both industry as well as the agency side. But it does happen, and we can't ignore that does happen. We read about them often, and I think the most important element of that particular stage, though, if it does happen, it doesn't mean because you protest you're going to win. It doesn't mean you're the resulting winner. Very rarely, actually, does it open it up for the recompete, because the agencies usually they have that integrity in place, and I think they dot their I's and cross their T's and ensure that it is done in accordance with the federal acquisition regulations.
Right. And it sounds like this information disclosure that you're saying, whether through a debriefing, formal debriefing, more informal, whatever it is, that lends itself to just a good partnership between industry and government.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Communication.
Yeah.
Always.
Makes a lot of sense. Now I'm curious from an industry perspective. During this award phase, I don't want to oversimplify it and say it's happening behind a curtain or in a black box, but how do you deal with it from an industry perspective? What are your recommendations to industry? The government has the proposals and they seem to be the ones initiating communication. What is your advice then to industry during this phase?
It's a tough phase because we are impatient people. That's what we want. Instant awards. The things that we could do in the commercial world simply cannot occur in the federal world. The rules of engagement are different. And again, procurement integrity. And not that it doesn't happen commercially, but we can come up with a contract between two commercial parties, agree to the terms of that contract, and we move forward the next day. Federally, that's not going to happen, so you have to be patient. I think it's important, again, to be cognizant and understand exactly what stage you're in when the award stage begins and once your proposal is submitted. So I think it's just imperative to, if you don't hear anything, don't panic. Don't anyone panic. It just maybe means that your proposal is being evaluated. They don't need anything from you. They like what they see. And until you officially receive some notice or communication from the contracting officer, then you just need to stay patient.
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons on the government side that the patience is required, because, I mean, frankly, at this stage, there's a lot of eyes looking at this award before the ink can be put on the paper. Legal's probably going to look at it depending on the dollar amount. You're going to have supervisors looking at it, up from the contracting officer. And, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed before it's going to be sent out. So really the government has an obligation to ensure that instrument that is awarded is the best it can be.
Earlier you touched on some of the do's, the don'ts, the can'ts. We briefly touched on it.
Yeah.
But is there specific guidance on just those things, the things you do have to do as a contracting officer, the things you can do but you don't have to do, and the things you must do, and the things you should stay away from, don't even touch with a 10-foot pole?
Yeah, I mean, a good thing to bring up here is this is outlined specifically in the FAR, okay? And that's another kind of a sidebar that I really encourage industry and contracting officers, don't be afraid to actually crack open the FAR and read it. The part that really talks about this entire stage that we're discussing right now is FAR Part 15, and specifically FAR 15306. Okay, that's exchanges with offers after receipt of proposals.
And it's not even that long.
It's like 5 pages long,
Right.
really. It's a worthwhile read. Yeah, it really is. I mean, and it literally spells out everything that we're talking about right now for the most part. And if you want to become kind of a pseudo expert, I mean, this is a great way to do that.
Sure.
Really, it goes back to procurement integrity. I mean, that's what we're trying to protect the interests of the business that are proposing, and yet achieve the best value for the government. So that's where the constraints are.
And when you're putting a response to an RFP together from the industry, be clear as to what you're responding to. There's a statement of work. There's a PWS, performance work statement. You have to answer the call. So if you submit something that is not relevant to what the agency is seeking, then that's immediately going to discount your proposal, right? It's going to put you in that, I'm not quite sure what they're responding to, but this is not what we need. So I think it's important to listen to not have knowledge of all the requirements that the agency is seeking. There's always administrative requirements, technical requirements, pricing requirements, and within each of those sections of an RFP response, there's specific requests. That goes to Alan's point, instructions to offer, and the evaluation criteria. Those are the two most important elements of a solicitation, even though I say every piece of a solicitation is important, but I definitely want to know what I'm up against.
Well, I was going to say, you must be reading my paper, because that's what I was going to ask. What is your advice to industry? How can they optimize their chances of success, optimize their interests in responding to a solicitation from your perspective on the side of industry?
Don't go big and get in RFP 1. Be careful. You can't plan, when you're a successful commercial entity, you have to have a federal business plan, because selling to the federal government is different. And I think it's important to also recognize you can't sell to the entire U.S. federal government. Pick an agency that's interested, or do your competitive research. So the more you know going in, you can have a targeted look at their spending dashboards are out there. So yep. RFPs, upcoming RFPs are supposed to be published. So from the company perspective, be prepared. Set your sights on, track it. Have your profiles on FedBizOps. Have your profiles set on those other agency posting websites where you'll receive push notifications of potential RFPs that are relevant to you. So I think again, you have to devote the resources. Don't go into the $10 million opportunity when you're a $2 million company. And I think it's important to don't ignore that low-hanging fruit, especially year-end purchases. where the agencies do have a significant amount of purchases in the last quarter of the government fiscal year. And it's very important, very relevant to get your foot in the door and looking at those smaller RFP responses that will get you, build your past performance and really get hopefully some great performance reviews for you.
Sounds good. Likewise, Alan, from the government perspective, obviously treating all offers equally with the same level of integrity from the contracting officer's perspective. What advice would you have to industry? What is going to catch a contracting officer's eye?
Yeah, like Melody said, really pay attention to every part of that solicitation. There is no fine print. There is no fine print. A lot of folks I've heard, they don't pay attention to the clauses at the back end of a solicitation. That's a mistake because there's valuable things there. Listen, I totally understand that small businesses especially don't have the resources to necessarily be experts in federal contracting. But what can bring you to the next level, if you want to go from kind of surviving to thriving, then it's a good idea to just kind of get familiar with the rules, in this case, the regulations. And that's and so for contracting officers, I say know the rules that the contractors have to play by, and if we know each other's perspectives, we can kind of move forward better. So businesses, if they will just kind of look at the FAR instead of ignoring it totally, there's very few places, that direct our attention to our constraints in the government. FAR 15306, like I say, 5-page read. You can look at it and kind of become a pseudo-expert. The instructions to offerers at the end of a contract, that is valuable information to know so that you can be better at preparing proposals.
Sounds good. That sounds great. Now, since I would assume industry is hungry for any and all information it can get its hands on, and it seems like everything the government has is public information, why can or can't the government just release everything that it has, everything that it knows?
Well, again, really, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it does speak to procurement integrity. I mean, if business doesn't have the level of certainty that it's a fair process, then we're going to discourage competition.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I hear businesses saying is, oh, the incumbent always wins, and things like that. They get discouraged. You can't really feel that way. I mean, business, even with the government, is all about fulfilling a need, and the government is always looking to fulfill its needs with the best value out there. So if you keep trying and keep yourself in the game, eventually you're gonna get into the game. You're gonna be able to land a contract. You're gonna be able to grow from the small to the large requirement and large award, and that's how you can achieve success.
And I have to stress Alan's point of discouragement to the companies, to industries, because if there isn't that integrity of procurement and some comfort level for these companies to realize that their information that they submit won't become publicly available because of competitive knowledge, that would really potentially be harmful to a commercial entity. So there has to be some comfort level of understanding, again, the rules of engagement. We have stressed, both of us here, the rules, understanding the regulations, what you're bound by, and what the agencies protect a company's data and it's on its own merits, so that it isn't and won't cause any ill fallout to the companies.
So yeah, just off Melody's point there, I guess the best way to clarify this is to say that contractors really need to know their rights, and the government needs to know the rules. They're the ones that need to be the expert on the rules, but you'll have more success on either side if you know the other's perspective.
Absolutely.
So again, FAR 15306 tells exactly what we have to protect on the contractor's side.
A
the information
savvy
that we can't release.
contractor is going to know what you need to do
Exactly.
when I'm sitting across from you.
Right. And a good contracting officer is going to know what you're trying to
Right.
achieve.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and that's what you want to end up with in the end.
And it sounds like we're getting pretty close to a wrap up here. So, Melody, how would you summarize information disclosure practices in the acquisition process or in the award stage of the acquisition process from the industry perspective?
I think you need to be prepared to devote the proper resources to these responses and submitting your best foot forward in any RFP proposal. Be savvy and knowledgeable with respect to what the agency is expecting to receive, what the criteria will be for the award of the contract. And again, I can't stress enough about devoting the resources to it, because it will take time to develop this response. And then once it's in, you have to keep yourself in check and be patient.
Sounds good. And Alan, from the government side?
Again, contractors need to know their rights, and the government needs to be experts on the rules. And if you can see from the other's perspective and use that to advance your knowledge, you're going to be more successful.
Oh, fantastic. Melody, Alan, thank you so much for being here and providing your insights.
Thank you for having us, John.
Melissa, back to you.
Award of the contract is the heart of the acquisition process. This is where the government's planning, market research, and strategies converge to form a best value outcome. During this stage, the government communicates information to industry in a number of ways, such as clarifications, communications, and discussions. Information communicated is tailored and specific to individual offerers, and the government exercises caution in disclosure to ensure protection of proprietary information and preservation of the integrity of the process. Understanding the government's needs, industry's capabilities, and the rules of engagement will expedite the process, reduce conflict, and provide a meaningful experience for both government and industry. Thank you again, John, Alan, and Melanie, for an informative and enlightened discussion. In the session today, we've examined a number of myths and questions around information disclosure during various stages of the acquisition process. We've heard from professionals from both government and industry share their experience and impart wisdom with regard to the importance of collaboration and the when and how information is shared. Over the past several years, the government has made tremendous strides in encouraging early, frequent, and constructive engagement with industry to effect better outcomes. We saw the beginnings of the effort with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy's Myth-Busting campaign in 2001. No system or process is perfect, but by seeking to understand, work together uniformly, and share knowledge and information, we can improve processes and engender optimal outcomes for end users of our products and services, and ultimately the American taxpayer. Thank you for joining me for another Can We Talk session. Have a great rest of the day. This is Melissa Gary, GSA Agency Ombudsman.
We're glad you've taken the time to experience this presentation about information disclosure during the acquisition process. The Federal Acquisition Institute thanks Melissa Gary, Ombudsman for the General Services Administration, for leading our journey, as well as our speakers Kitty Klaus, Tommy Benton, Jameel Charlton, Lawana Russell, Melody Jean Greco, and Alan Monaco. And of course, FAI thanks you, our viewers, for your time and attention. Typically, after the presentation of our acquisition seminars, FAI conducts live question and answer sessions, so you have the opportunity to quiz our presenters on anything you've seen or heard that may have caught your attention. For this seminar, we are instead collecting your questions until December 31st, 2016 at contact@fai.gov. We'll collect your questions, share them with our presenters, and post the responses with this video in the fai.gov Media Library. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.